So as I was saying, our problem is the user, is the final user. People are in a way trained to use Windows and trained.
When you say the final user, do you mean the
person that is sitting
people
behind?
who read the newspaper?
No.
You mean
people who are working at the newspaper.
Those people, however, you select them and you can train them.
Yeah.
So if you take a long-term view, the point is you face an obstacle in moving your operation towards freedom. So instead of giving up and just basically lying down in front of this obstacle, you can say, I will overcome this obstacle. And you can start taking the necessary steps. It might take a year to train a few of these people to switch to free software, but you can make it happen. And it's vital that you do so, because by using non-free software, you're endorsing an injustice. By showing that you'll make the effort to move to free software, and that means teaching others, and then you can talk about it to the public, that's helping the free software movement liberate cyberspace.
Yeah, as I was saying, we do use and we're increasing the use of free software. As I said, we have some of our servers use free software.
Well, that's good. I can't imagine why anyone wants to run a server that runs a non-free system. It's an unusual practice. Basically, businesses that know what they're doing, they all run gnu+linux or maybe some other free system. Why ever think of having a server with a non-free program in it? But you should go beyond the servers, because it's the computer that a person is working at that affects that person's freedom. So it seemed ironic to me that free software had such a giant success in servers, in supercomputers, and yet the area that's most important is people's laptops or desktop PCs, and of course mobile devices also. Because our goal is to liberate everyone in cyberspace from the unjust power of some software developer or software owner
that is controlling whoever get access to
whoever uses the software. Basically, that's what a non-free program does. That's an injustice. It puts the users under the power of the owner.
And oftentimes people get confused. They say, well, I downloaded for free.
Well, it's clear
that's not really sometimes true, because you can download for free, but that doesn't mean
that's not software livre.
Yes.
Remember, free software is a matter of freedom, not price, which is why it's much better to say it in Portuguese. If you say software livre, people know you're not saying software grátis.
Yes.
We're not talking about the price. That's a minor detail.
Yeah. I mean, money should be around in order for people to maintain themselves and keep doing
money exists in society, and we're not trying to change that.
Yeah.
That's not the issue.
The point is not giving freedom to people to choose and
not to choose, freedom in their lives. When you talk about freedom to choose, that diminishes the meaning of freedom. Because if you have a choice between several proprietary programs, that means you can choose your master. But freedom is not having a master, having no master. That means you can control your life. So if I were offered a choice between 50 different proprietary programs, I'd say none of them, because each one would subjugate me to somebody, and I don't care who the somebody is. What I insist on is freedom, and I will work for years so that I can avoid using any of those 50. That's why talking about a monopoly is a distraction. Microsoft for a while was a quasi-monopoly. And yes, it's bad to allow such quasi-monopolies to exist in any area for any reason. In fact, it's bad to allow any area of business to be so concentrated that there are only 5 competitors. That's already too much concentration. Governments have a duty to make sure that that can't happen, and to break up those companies one way or another to make so that they're weaker. But that's a totally different issue. The injustice of a non-free program is that what it does is controlled by the owner. And it doesn't matter whether that owner controls 500 million users or 5 users. It's wrong either way. And free software means the users control the program. I better explain what free software means, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Free software, software libre, is software that respects users' freedom and community. With any program, there are 2 possibilities. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. It's always one or the other. When the users control the program, that's free software. Because that means that they can make that program do their computing activities the way they wish.
I see.
If the users don't control the program, then automatically the program controls the users and the owner controls the program. So that non-free program, just because it's non-free, gives the owner power over the users. This should never happen. It's wrong. Mm-hmm. And our goal in the free software movement is to put an end to that. The users should always control the software they use. Now, controlling the software, actually, there are 2 kinds of control. There's separate control, one user having control over what the program does, and there's collective control, meaning that users in any sort of group can make the program do what they want. Mm-hmm. And they're both necessary. You have to have individual control and collective control. And this requires the 4 essential freedoms. These freedoms are what give the users control over the program. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program however you wish for any purpose. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the program's source code and change it so it does your computing the way you wish. Now, these 2 freedoms give each user separately control over the program. You could make the program do anything that way. But that's not enough. First of all, most users are not programmers. They don't know how to change source code. But even if you are a programmer, you use so many programs typically, you wouldn't have time to study those programs and make all the changes yourself that you want. So your control would be everywhere, but it would only go a short distance.
Then
what we need, therefore, also collective control. Mm-hmm. Collective control allows the non-programmer users to participate in the control too, because if a group of users want a certain change, they can get together and they can then, and some of them may be programmers, and then they can all decide together what changes to make, and the programmers will do it. Or suppose there's nobody in the group that is a programmer. They can all put together some money and hire a programmer to do whatever it is they wanted. So this means that groups of users can make big changes happen, or small changes.
I see. Yeah, we when the GNU project started and how this how this whole thing came to you, and you said, okay, it's time to in
the 1970s, I worked for MIT, and we were in a software sharing community. In 1971, when I started, that was not unusual. There was a lot of free software still. But over the 70s, the operating systems became proprietary. By 1980, we were basically the only place where there was a free operating system. We had written most of it ourselves, but we had got some pieces from other places back earlier in the 70s. And then that community died. The computer, our free operating system, was written for, became obsolete. It was not portable, the system. Back in 1970, basically it was rare to make a portable operating system. It wasn't it was not obvious how to do that very well. So I found myself facing a future of proprietary software, which basically meant disgust and shame. A future that was not offered me nothing to be worth living. So I decided I was going to fix this problem. I was going to make another software sharing community. But we couldn't have a software sharing community unless we had free software that was sufficient for everything we needed to do. And that didn't exist. Well, that was my job. That was my duty. What I say is that this problem fell into my lap. I could do something about this problem, and I knew no one else was going to try. And so I announced... So
everything started with GNU and then replied to several different...
Well, yes and no. I had to decide what kind of system it would be. I concluded that the best kind of system would be something compatible with the Unix operating system because it had some technical advantages, it had some clean design aspects, and it was very widely used. So once I decided to make a Unix-like operating system, then according to the traditions of my community, the name you give it is a recursive acronym that says this system is not the other. So the recursive acronym I found was GNU, which stands for GNU's not Unix. And then I announced the project and asked people to join in and help. Little by little, people started joining in and writing some programs for the system, because I realized if I had to write them all myself, it would take decades perhaps, but that with other people joining in, it would get done sooner. And it did. In 1992, there was one important gap in the GNU system, and the program Linux was made free software in 1992. It first appeared in 1991, but then it was non-free. But in 92, Linux became free, and using Linux to fill the last gap in GNU, we got a complete system, which was basically the GNU system plus Linux.
As a kernel is completing the GNU
system. At that point, it was possible for the first time to buy a PC and run it in freedom. And the goal, of course, is all software should be free. Users should have control of their own computing so that companies or other software developers don't have power over people.
As saying this, it reminds me of something here. Of course, this is not perfect, but it's a start. In Brazil, there's a government program called Software Livre, which the government encourages the agencies, cities, states, whatever, to use free software, not only as like a text editor or anything, like an operating system being free software. Do you think governments should pay more attention to it, to how to incentivize people to
actually more than that? The government exists for the people. Everything it does, if it is legitimate, that's because it's being done for the people. Well, every public agency has a responsibility to the people to maintain its full control of its computing to make sure that it doesn't fall into any private hands. However, if the agency uses a non-free program, that computing has fallen into private hands. This is wrong. Mm-hmm. This is a failure to comply with their responsibility to the people. All public agencies should be making steady progress at getting rid of all non-free software from their activities. Now, with something as big as a government, that's going to take time. It might take 20 years, but I'm sure it can be done in 20 years. The point is, take big steps. Take steps that are big enough so that in 20 years you reach the intended destination. And that requires more than just encouragement. Mm-hmm. Take a look at gnu.org/government for the policies we propose to bring about this migration over time. But it has to be mandatory on every agency at every level. And this means that public agencies should not be allowed to use non-free software without demonstrating that they need an exception. And the exception should last for a limited period of time, like maybe 5 years. And then the agency has to apply again. And the government should have funds for development of free replacement software. So every year it should look at the list of exceptions that it has granted and say, what can we develop to eliminate many of these exceptions? Mm-hmm. What free program could we write so that in a few years when it's working, a lot of these exceptions will no longer be renewable because there will be a free program to use. But also, the government has to run the computers that do its computing. There is a modern foolish practice, which nobody should do. It's extremely foolish to do this, which we call service as a software substitute. Mm-hmm. If somebody says, I offer this service, I'll do that computing job for you. Send me all your data. I'll do the computing and I'll send you the results. That's a trap for fools, because if you send your data to that service, you don't control what it's doing. It might as well be a non-free program. So the state must also completely reject the idea of entrusting its computing to computers run by anything other than the state. And you should refuse to entrust your computing to computers run by anyone other than you. Mm-hmm. Where you could mean you personally, or it could mean the newspaper. Anyone, basically, the same principle applies to. Except that if you lose control over your computing, you're the victim. But if a public agency loses control over its computing, the victim is not the public agency, it's the people.
It's the people. It's the society that
exactly.
It's hoping that this agency or the government is doing something right.
Doing the right thing. But if the agency has no control over what it's doing, it can't be accountable. Mm-hmm. This is a general injustice of privatization. If the provision of some public service is handed to a company, the employees of that company become much less accountable. So then the boss can tell them to cheat the public while paying them too little so that it doesn't really get good people. And this is predictable, and there's almost nothing the people can do about it except say, no more privatization. Bring all these public services back to state employees.
Well managed, that will do the job the way it's supposed to be done.
Because you can be sure that the company that gets the state contract is going to do a lousy job, because that's the profitable way to handle such a thing. The only way in which companies do a good job for the public is when the state has nothing to do with it. If there's something that you just want to buy and there's a competitive market, then the competition will make the companies provide you with good products or good services, because you'll drop whichever one doesn't. But when the state gives a contract to a company to do this certain job in a certain area, there is no competition there, not in any effective way. What we need for a public service is clear accountability, and usually governments have made laws to ensure accountability for the public employees that do things for people. And if they're not doing it right, there's something the public can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on that matter, I had a bunch of questions here, but I think we went this other way, which I think is more interesting actually than all these questions that I wrote with Geraldo. Do you think that in some way, when you have a whole bunch of computers using the same software, same operating system, they are more likely to be exposed to what happened in the elections, where 50 million people got their personal information used?
Actually, that has nothing to do. They have nothing to do with each other. Are you talking about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica?
No,
I'm not sure what you're talking about. You say 50 million people.
Yeah,
but what was that?
No, that's
Please
what
be
Facebook
concrete.
and Analytica. But
That had nothing to do with the operating system
I know.
on
Yeah.
those computers.
On
Some of them were using Windows, some of them, which is an injustice.
Yeah.
Some of them were using Mac OS, which is an even nastier injustice in some ways. And some of them were using gnu+linux. But the operating system had nothing to do with that particular wrong that was done to people, and that wrong was collecting people's data.
Yeah, well,
I believe we need laws to stop collection of personal data. Whether it's done by companies or by the state, it's dangerous either way.
Mm-hmm.
And saying that you need to ask for the user's consent, that's no protection. It is trivial for companies to manufacture consent by users.
yeah, I'm going to give you consent in order to use your product.
Exactly.
If I don't consent, you're not going to allow me to use it.
Exactly.
So
And there's also the idea of hiding it in the fine print in some long contract that users agree to without reading. So we just need laws that say, you're not allowed to get this data unless you can prove that you have some legitimate grounds for asking for it, and that that this job couldn't possibly be done in some other way without asking for that data. And it doesn't matter if users consent.
Yeah, I was bringing that 50 million that happened with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, and this sharing of personal information, basically to come to a point that people sometimes they're not aware of their doing, and people are not aware of where they're going. As you said, you send your information to somebody else to do the job that you could be doing yourself. Mm-hmm. Then
it's not always a case of that. For instance, Facebook.
People are not really aware of how things work.
Facebook, though, is doing something different. Facebook doesn't say, we'll do your computing for you, just send all the data and we'll do the computing job. What Facebook is doing is communication. It's not doing individuals' own computing. Now, Instagram, I think, I've never seen it. I don't know much detail about what it does.
Me neither.
I think that Instagram started as a photo editing service. Mm-hmm. You would send a photo and then you'd say, do these edits on the photo. You could do that in your own computer. Mm-hmm. So Instagram, I think, was an instance of service as a software substitute, which was wrong. Facebook is not an instance of that, but it's doing something wrong, namely collecting lots of data about people, and we have to make sure that such disservices do not exist. But in order to understand these issues, we have to see which different issues exist and not mix them up. Mm-hmm. Collecting a lot of personal data is wrong in one way, and a service that does people's own computing for them is wrong in a different way. So Instagram, if my understanding of what it does is correct, is wrong in both ways.
Yep. And I was had this idea here. How does this copyright, how it works with the free software, and how the paid software copyrights?
But please don't compare free and paid.
No,
Livre or now livre.
No, what I'm saying is not free as with non-pay. I'm saying free software.
But then you said paid software.
Yeah.
To contrast, but the contrast with free software is not paid software.
Yeah.
It is user subjugating software, whether users pay to use it or not.
Yeah.
Remember, there are many non-free programs that are gratis, but they're still unjust because the users don't control them.
Yeah.
What again was your question exactly?
Copyright.
Copyright. Yeah. Basically, copyright is not a crucial problem. Here's why. There are various methods that are used to make programs non-free. The principal technical method is they can technically make it impossible to change a program by having the product check for a signature on the code, and it refuses to run anything modified. And then the principal legal method is by making users agree to a contract, because that gives them a lot more power than copyright does. They can impose all sorts of nasty requirements on a user through a contract, which they can't impose through copyright. The secondary methods, well, there's a technical one, which is not publishing the source code, and the secondary legal method is copyright. Meanwhile, free software gets along okay with copyright, as long as the contributors to the program agree to contribute to it. Well, they hold the copyright, they can do that. And then free software licenses are based on copyright. They're declarations by the copyright holders of this code, where they say, we give you the four freedoms, and here are the details. So copyright does not generally get in our way.
It's a guarantee that the software will.
No, it doesn't guarantee anything. It's just that copyright is something we have to take account of, and we do. It's not an obstacle. However, it also gives us the ability to do copyleft. Copyleft is a way of using copyright to defend freedom for every user. In Portuguese, it's esquerdo autoral. It's the same joke, you see.
Yeah.
The point is, with copyleft, we say, we give you the right to redistribute this, but you have to redistribute it the right way. You have to pass it along with the same license and with the source code. And if you added anything, the license covers the additions as well. You have to distribute them in the same way. And that way, we legally require the middlemen to pass along the same freedom to the following users. And thus, when this works properly, when governments enforce it, we can make sure that the users all get freedom. As
I'm not an expert on computing and software and so on, I have a basic knowledge. Came to my mind here, and I bet a lot of people would ask, how does safety or how can you control whatever gets into your computer
Well, the main thing is
Today you have a whole bunch of things.
let me answer, because basically proprietary software gives the user zero security against its developer.
Yep.
And most discussions of computer security ignore this point.
Mm-hmm.
They limit the topic to security against third parties, and they don't say that they're omitting something, which is security against the software's developer and owner. And when they talk, when they talk about security of products that people put into their homes, these are typically products that are tied to one server. The manufacturer of the product has a server. The product is constantly communicating through the internet with that server. That is basically guaranteed to spy on the user.
Mm-hmm.
It's the whole point of it is to be malicious in most cases. For instance, we read last year about a sex toy that's designed to communicate over the internet, accept commands for what to do. That could be enjoyable in some circumstances, but it communicates through the manufacturer's server, which means that the manufacturer is taking note of everything.
Every time you use
Not only that, but the product was built for spying in this way because they put into it a thermometer. Now the users, what do they need with a thermometer? They know what they're doing. The point is, the manufacturer wanted to know when the device was in contact with a human body. And the thermometer, exactly. And I suspect that it also knows just how the device is in contact with a human body.
By different
temperatures,
different parts of the body.
Right, exactly. So, is it superficial contact?
Internal contact.
The point is that this is a monstrous, vicious device. But once you see it's talking with the manufacturer's server, you know that they're going to be mistreating the users. Now, the insecurity of these devices is a big topic, because what that means is that third parties can break into them and spy on them also, or turn it into a botnet or whatever. But these discussions of security, they actually focus on the manufacturer's security, not the user's security. The only way the users will have security is if it's free software. Free software gives the users control, which means they have the chance to try to maintain security. Proprietary software always gives the users no security against the developers.
Yeah. It's a way of controlling, so they won't give you that ability.
Exactly.
Because if they do,
the users would have control, and they don't want the users to have control.
And that's one of the issues that came to as a topic. I don't know how it was in the United States, but in Brazil with that game Pokemon Go, where you chase those little monsters around town. And
I never saw that, of course. I only read about it.
Yeah, I have two daughters, and they asked me to install the game for them on their phones, and I said, okay, fine, we can do it if we are able not to share any information. Okay, so as a parent, I looked into it, and I was not able to set up the game without sharing information. So I said, you know what? If we're going to share anything here, you're not going to use it. Because I don't want anybody to know where you are, what you're doing, where you're...
Everything in a mobile phone is spying on and tracking the user. Almost every app is connected to some organization which is getting data about the user.
Mm-hmm.
The nastiest ones are the streaming apps, things like Spotify or Netflix, because they make the users identify themselves, and then they keep track of what the user watches or listens to. Now, this should be illegal. Nobody should be allowed to know what you watch or what you listen to. That kind of surveillance of people threatens a free society. So
But
I
not
would.
only those two. I mean, there's
Well, there are many others, of course, but the point
even
is.
Google when
Yes.
and websites.
Yeah, no, basically, but the point is they should. With many of those sites, you can avoid identifying yourself and you can disguise where you are and who you are. But you can't do that with the services.
Streaming
I call
services.
them disservices that require users to identify themselves to pay. And then likewise for transportation, consider Uber. Uber requires users to identify themselves, and therefore it keeps track, it keeps a dossier about each user.
Oh yeah.
Well, I'm never going to be one of those. Not only that, they found that the Uber app was tracking people before and after the rides.
Using the locations.
Exactly.
GPS.
Well, the point is, I don't have a device like that, and I never will.
You have a regular cell phone.
I don't have any mobile phone because the phone system tracks them all.
Yeah.
Right?
Radio and
part of the way the cellular communication works. They always know what cell you're in, and they can find out exactly where you are if they want to. But not only that, a mobile phone has a universal backdoor. A backdoor in a program or a device means it's accepting some kind of commands from someone that isn't supposed to be the user that tell it to do something dirty to the user. Well, a universal backdoor means it can be told to do anything whatsoever to the user because it allows remote changes of the code itself. Well, more or less every portable phone has a universal backdoor, and almost every model connects the processor with that backdoor to the microphone. So remotely they can turn it into a full-time listening device. If someone here has a portable phone, that could be listening to and transmitting our conversation right now. Well, I don't mind for this conversation, it's meant to be published. But any conversation you have with anybody, if there's a portable phone in the room, it could be listening and transmitting. And when they modify them, they don't just do this, they do another thing. It won't shut off anymore. They modify it so that when you push the shut off button, it pretends to shut off, but it doesn't really. It keeps listening and transmitting all the time.
Unless you run out of battery.
Exactly. Which could eventually happen.
Yeah.
The point is...
But then if you have one of these, you don't want to run out of battery. So
well, you wouldn't want to if you expected to use it.
Yeah.
But when I found out about this, I decided I would do without Stalin's dream. Because that's what it is. A mobile phone does the two things Stalin would have wanted to do to everyone in the Soviet Union, which is track their movements and listen to their conversations.
And not only the microphone. I mean, they can turn on the camera. They can do
They
whatever.
can, yeah. Although it's easy to put it inside something so that the camera won't see much.
Yeah, you can just.
But you can't cover up the microphone in the same way. You could put the thing in. What are you going to put it in that such that it wouldn't hear conversations nearby? There isn't such a thing.
Yeah, you need to have like a box that would not. You know.
Well, that had tremendous, great sound insulation.
Yeah.
Now somebody's building a mobile phone where all these things will be fixed as much as is possible, because there's no way to put free software into that processor that's talking to the radio. But what you could do is give it an on-off switch, a real on-off switch, so that if you turn it off, it's not running. It has no power.
Like if you have a physical thing, they
Exactly.
can actually turn on physically.
The microphone is not connected to that processor. So
gotta
even
go
if it's
through this physical
it has to go through the other processor that's going to run free software.
I see.
So that is assuming that your security on your free system is correct. The thing won't be able to listen to you when you're not making a call. You know, because normally the processor that runs the free system, that's what will listen to your microphone when your free software does it because you've told it to. And but that won't allow them to listen to you, except when you're making a call. Now, we all know that they can listen to phone calls through the exchange when you're making a call. The horrible change of mobile phones is that they can be used to listen to people all the time, wherever they are.
And police and law enforcement agencies, they have software that can do that.
Right. And of course, you can't expect them to be the good guys necessarily.
Not always.
It depends who you are, right?
Yeah.
If you're poor in Brazil,
you may not, but if you have, yeah.
Or if you're a dissident. So, we shouldn't be carrying around things that allow the state to listen to us and track us all the time, because that gives the state too much power. Now, the state needs to be powerful, or it can't carry out its mission.
But not too powerful.
Right, we have to have a protection to make sure that the people control the state and not vice versa.
Yeah, the state needs to be big enough to provide everything that it's supposed to provide, but not too big so that they will control us.
It has to be limited in some ways so that democracy can exist.
I mean, in the sense of the word democracy, but what we see today, it's not
mostly plutocracy.
Yeah.
The rich control the government. That's very clear in Brazil, I'm sad to say, and very clear in the United States, I'm sad to say. Someone did a study and determined that since the late 1990s, public opinion has no effect on U.S. government policies.
Well, in Brazil, that's also true. And we can, I mean, there's lots of examples. And one of the things is that as they have all the information through the different kinds of devices that we use, they don't need to hear what we have to say because they know what we
They don't care what we have to say. But the point is, public opinion, regardless of how expressed or how evaluated, doesn't matter to the U.S. government since the late 1990s, 20 years ago. What the study checked was, they looked at public opinion polling. So on some issues, it's known what public opinion was, and they looked at government decisions, and they found that the government decisions reflected the wishes of the rich and the wishes of whatever special interest were mainly interested in that particular decision, and that's all. And general public opinion had no effect anymore.
Yeah, well, in Brazil, that's going on since the 1500s, which for us, it's in our system internally. It's sad to say that we got used to it, but in the United States, which has supposedly has a more evolved democracy than
It did. This development was in the late 1990s. That's when democracy in the U.S. basically became so thoroughly controlled and suppressed that it couldn't do anything. And now we're fighting to change that through the progressive movement.
And
but we haven't won much yet.
And how can this digital inclusion
I'm not in favor of digital inclusion. And without asking, inclusion in what?
No. What I'm saying is, it's right. What kind of inclusion? How you want people to be included?
I don't campaign for inclusion. I campaign for freedom. If we want to have a digital society that is good to be included in, we need freedom.
Yep.
So I'm campaigning for the freedom. I don't endorse calls for digital inclusion, although I don't see as much of that now as I did 10 years ago. 10 years ago, so many activities presumed that using digital products and tools was automatically good, and I had to say to them, no, it's not automatically good. It can be an injustice. We should aim to be extracted from, if there's an unjust digital society, the goal is not inclusion but extraction, escape.
Mm-hmm.
So I set myself directly against all those plans to aim for digital inclusion. I say we need digital freedom.
And then if that increases, then it's good to be included.
Then it might be good to be included. But first, let's fight for the freedom. Let's not blindly lure more people to be included in things like Facebook and Google tracking and Apple and Microsoft and Amazon.
I'm probably one of the few exceptions that I don't have a personal Facebook account.
Good.
Neither my daughters, neither my wife. So
people should not be useds of Facebook. Facebook does not have users; it has useds.
Yeah, people are. I mean, they collect your data and they're selling your information to third parties. And
there is one thing about Facebook that would actually be a useful service if it were done by itself, which is a way people could say, here's how you contact me. If you knew me before and you want to get in touch, here's how.
Like a phone book type of thing that you could reach people and
exactly.
As soon as they
and that could be a public activity done by the state. If you want it, you can be listed. And there's some way that it will send you a message, but it won't tell anyone how it's reaching you. It'll just let them send you a message. Okay, so that's good.
And talking a little bit about the GNU system, as you said, just to tell people, you could install it in just about any PC compatible computer and run it as a operating system.
Well, more or less. The point is that some peripherals and some video game high power video displays.
But for the regular user, the ones that don't use like browsing and stuff.
Well, there's some devices that need a non-free driver. So if you want only free software in your system, you may need to choose the computer properly. You look at fsf.org for that information.
The Free Software Foundation website where there's all the information about it.
In /resources /HW, you'll find that kind of information.
And I think we talked quite a bit. We're about 40 minutes in, and I don't know if you'd like to add something. Send a message to people.
I'd like to add that we have a website for the GNU system and the free software movement, which is called gnu.org. So in gnu.org/philosophy, you'll find lots of articles about, various philosophical or political points that relate to free software. In gnu.org/licenses, you'll find everything about free licenses, which licenses are free, what's good or bad about each one, how they're different, and so on. And in gnu.org/GNU, you'll find the history of GNU. In gnu.org/education, you'll see why schools should, as a matter of policy, teach only free software, exclusively free software. And this applies to kindergarten, and this applies to the university and everything between. This applies to adult education. And when I say teach, I mean anything that the school does that tends to lead people to use lead the students to use a certain program, that should always be free software, because it's wrong for a school to teach dependence. That's the opposite of what the school is for. And teaching people to use proprietary software is like teaching them to take addictive drugs, like teaching them to take smoke tobacco. It's absolutely wrong, and it's inexcusable.
In a sense that you got to build a sense of freedom in
Right,
people,
the purpose of the school.
and they're being able to choose which one suits better.
No, not
But-
choose. It's so that they will live in freedom and
Yeah.
be ready to do so. Remember, having a choice of programs is not the same thing. Having a choice between 5 proprietary operating systems, which is what people have today, that's no good, because they're all subjugating their users. That's just having a choice of masters. It's not enough. Freedom is not a matter of having some choices. That's a misunderstanding of freedom, which diminishes it. If you think about freedom together with choice, that means you don't understand what freedom really means. You've got a smaller idea of freedom, so it's going to look less important. So that attempt to define freedom in terms of choice diminishes freedom, and thus diminishes people's determination to have freedom. Anyway, in gnu.org/government, you'll find our proposed policies for governments to migrate over time in a reliable way, and making sure that they will over time reach the digital sovereignty of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, using a non-free program in a critical agency, such as the Army, the police, the firemen, electric supply, communications, and so on, that threatens national security, because every non-free program tends to have malicious functionalities, and the most widely used ones, we document these malicious functionalities in gnu.org/malware. So if a government agency is using Windows or Mac OS or Android or iOS or Chrome OS, it has known malicious functionalities, and the government is the victim.
Mm-hmm. And society too, because
yes,
we're down the line.
And these vulnerabilities, these malicious functionalities, they're not accidents. The point is that they're ideal for a cyber attack against the country.
Mm-hmm. As a court, not in big ways, but always happening. Those.
So the point is,
stuff. If the software was really good, you didn't need any of those. If it was well built, you wouldn't need all those firewalls and all that protection.
Well, I'm not sure about that. No. Remember, if it's hard for anybody to do a perfect job.
No, I know, but
so I won't say that free software has no bugs or no security holes. What I will say is free software gives you a chance to try to maintain good security, whereas with proprietary software, if you're the user, you're helpless.
You don't have it.
You don't, and not only that, you have no security against the software developer. A non-free program requires blind faith in the software developer, whereas with free software, the community can depend on itself. Free software is the only known defense against malware.
And as you talked about malware and kids are most likely, I mean, not only kids, but adults also, but this malware and all the things are out there on the internet, people are not really aware of how dangerous or
they don't want to understand this because they've become habituated to using user subjugating software with malicious functionalities. Look at gnu.org/malware if you want to see what these malicious functionalities do and what programs we know they're in. The point is, if you recognized how bad they are, you would rationally then conclude that you shouldn't be using any of them. So a lot of people find that prospect so distressing that they shut their eyes to the problem and they say, "What me worry?"
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Stallman, for this talk, and to. It's in English. We're gonna put subtitles in it.
That's good.
And I'm looking forward to this afternoon to hear from you again, and thank you again for coming to Pato Branco.
By the way, even though I don't speak Portuguese, I have invented jokes in Portuguese.
That's good.
Sabe o que faz brigadeiro?
No.
Ele agradece. Obrigado.
Obrigado.
Sabe por que provo todos os tipos de linguiça?
No.
Porque estudo linguística.
Tudo linguística. But you do speak Spanish, right?
Sí.
And el español se aprendió.
También invento chistes, pero no serían tan útiles para tus oyentes
Sí.
o lectores.
Mas estudió español en la escuela, en la universidad.
Yo,
Usted,
con libros.
con libros.
Fui a la autoescuela para hacerme autodidacta.
Sí. Well, thank you. Muchas gracias. And obrigado por to talk to our people that watch the website of Diário do Sudoeste. Thank you again.
A capital de Goiás é Goiânia.
Yep.
Então, a capital do Pará é Paranoia.
It should be.